So now we've come to the portion of our service where we affirm the 7 principles. And this morning, as I've said, I'd like to focus on the 3rd principle, which is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. To do that, I'm going to read some words from Reverend Rob Hardy's, pictured here with Susan Frederick Gray, who is the president of UUA. He is a Unitarian minister at All Souls Church, pictured here, obviously pre-pandemic. He writes about the 3rd principle: spiritual growth is not about a vertical ascent to heaven, but about growth in every dimension at once. It's spirituality in 3D. Growth in spirit doesn't measure one's proximity to a God above, but rather to the spaciousness of one's own soul, its volume and its capacity, its size. We need souls that can take in the world in all its complexity and diversity, yet still maintain our integrity. And we need souls that can love and be in relationships with all of this complexity. Instead of fight or flight, we need a spiritual posture of embrace. Our offering, whether they're big or small, strengthen our fellowship. Some of your offerings come in the form of time, talent, and energy, and we're very grateful for those. And some of them come in the form of some cash, which helps us keep this place running. While you search for your checkbook and your wallet, Whittaker Locke will play a Joseph Martin arrangement of Amazing Grace. Bravo. Worth the price of admission. Our speaker this morning, as I said, is Ray Rankin, English teacher, expert bicyclist, poet. He also has a new book out, Breadth of Sky. Ray has talked to us before, and his talks, all of them have been fascinating. Just to review for you, in June, he talked about a reason to believe. And for some of us come from a Christian background, and the reason to believe is all over that religious tradition. Some of us Buddhists, some of us Wiccans, some of us pagans, some of us other religious traditions. For those of us who come from a humanist or even an agnostic or an atheist background, that reason to believe is a little bit challenging. Ray explored that, and in August, he explored the topology of language, which hinted at poetry. In November, what was the talk in November? Are there atheists? Yeah, and we settled that question. Yes and no. Today's talk is Poetic Chaos, and it came out of a bicycle ride. And for me, riding my bike, especially with the UU Bicycle Club, is kind of a spiritual exercise. Sometimes Hal even takes us on mindfulness bicycle rides, but this one wasn't one of those. Ray and I were having a conversation, and I had a brainstorm, and my brainstorm was, Ellen and I have often talked about, Ray, do a presentation sometime where you just read your poems, and which are really come from the heart and from the soul, if there is such a thing. And it just came to me in a flash. Ray, get a hat, write down a bunch of numbers, because his poetry is numbered, and write down a bunch of numbers and draw about 10 or 15 titles from the hat and just read them at random. No presentation. And that way, of course, my big sales pitch was to Ray is you don't have to write anything more. Just read your poems that you've already read. My theory was that poetry, like Ray's, not like the John Brown poem, but poetry like Ray's, which doesn't have an obvious political or social or moral theme, it contains within it an exploration of that space, the soul. And so that any poems in Ray's collection will lead to some kind of spiritual search. And I want to read you just a short snippet by way of introducing Ray. By being placed into the machine of a poem, language can become alive again. It is both what it is and what it means, but also something that is greater than the ordinary. Somewhere in every poem, there are words that shine forth, light up, almost as if plugged in. This is what poetry can do for language and for us. So that's my idea. And Ray is going to read his poems with no comment, and then we're going to have the Joys and Concerns microphone out. And whatever springs to mind for you, we're going to ask you to share it by way of encouraging us all into exploring this spaciousness, which is our consciousness, our soul. So please welcome Ray Rankin, who will read poetry.
Good morning. Thank you, Bill, for those kind words. I hope to live up to them. 62. Skittering leaves overtake me, scorning my lax pedaling. A cow glances, returns to grazing. A wooden stop sign attest its grain. Crows mock that I was ever born. Cool ripens, wisp, curl in cobalt sky. I'm 7. Close eyes, I'm 4.
I just want to say how universal this is. Everybody, almost everybody, gets a chance to ride a bicycle, and we do it in childhood. And at 62, looking back on this and feeling like a kid again, I'm doing that now at 69, and it's just wonderful.
Ray, I did notice that you left out one of the key sensations of riding the bike beside a cow.
With good reason.
I was thinking about the sort of the sense of heat, or the sort of environment you're riding in, and all my riding as a child was in an urban environment. So it wasn't cows, it wasn't it was cars and little
Sure.
lanes between houses. So it was although it's universal, it can be very different in the context that you grow up in.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Michelle?
Put on your teacher hat. This is a question for the teacher. I see the imagery. It really creates a beautiful picture and all the memories and everything. But the one line that needs some interpretation, crows mock that I was ever born. Is there a deeper meaning for you in that part?
It was my birthday, and and crows just don't sound like they have nice things to say about you. So I don't think there was anything really deeper than that. Thank you for asking. North face bristlecones. In DC climbs, vowels, not in clump. Consonants in tangle roots. At tree line, sunsets last longer. Our creviced antecedents breathe a finer air. Wind sows through gnarled branches on stunted boles. Here, there's more to tell. The lodgepole pines and quaking aspen are moving in. New moon rises, but no one hears it. Nobody lives here. I've just been fascinated by bristlecones. I don't know if it's the oldest living tree, but it's certainly one of them. Looks like it's dead. And I was just so hurt by the idea that we or our children may be the last generation to see them because they can't adapt. They live way up at the tree line. And so now where they used to be the only ones, other trees are starting to move in. John Williams on TV. His rope of notes through an open hole lacks a cause. I tell you, he's too detached. Erect, stroking strings as if he weren't, till the camera zooms in. Then, the shadow of the hand that plays it rolls across the cedar top. Umbral fingers staving key, pitch, and direction that range me in at last. to me, the greatest guitarist of our time is John Williams. This is not the composer. And sometime in around the late 70s, I think I saw him on TV, and he's such the opposite of a rock guitarist. He didn't look like he was doing anything because he was perfectly erect, and the way that they play the guitar, their hands curled, and so you can't even see his fingers. And so it looks like he's just standing. You see a little bit of movement there, but it looks like he's just doing nothing. And yet, of course, he was playing the most beautiful music. And anyway, because of the lights coming from the side, you could see the shadows, the umbral fingers, the shadows of his fingers. And all of a sudden, that made it come alive for me. All of a sudden, I could see that he was doing something that I could respond to.
Ray, I'd just like to add, I don't think the audience probably doesn't know how much you love music, having worked in a music store. We went on a bike ride where 4 of us were in a car, drove up to the Silver Comet Trail, and coming back, I put on a CD of Vietnam era music. And Ray knew all the songs. And he knew not just the songs, about all the bands, and added all the trivia. So, Ray, thank you.
Ray, I'm sorry, it takes me just a minute to reflect on your poetry. In the previous poem, if you don't mind, in DC Climbs, what does DC refer to?
District of Columbia.
But there's no tree line there.
No. Oh, yeah. It's the arguments or lack of conversation happening in D.C. that's affecting the tree lines. It's a connection that I was making without making it.
Okay. Thank you.
I was going to add to that previous one, just living in Wyoming, how much of the mountainsides were dead before the fires came through. And that what you were, that poem really just reminded me how much of the West has already been dying with whitebark pine beetle and other things too. So when I heard you speak, it also just made me think of conflagration, and that term chaos sort of came in there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Desecration of Host. 20 buck cordwood, absurd, but worth it. The pops and the sizzles, sparks twining increments on to expectant sky. And these scarlet throbs and overhung trees proving that I am the interest in the flames. Hickory eyes burn hottest. So fire trucks hose older homes from Brick Avenue offsets. Trusses collapse, the skeleton heaves in, and I hold little faith in this thorough wetting, having traced already our surest route to sky. Time to head home, though I won't be any safer. You may have to forgive me on this. Does anybody here know what desecration of host means? I didn't. I just ran across that term and I said, wow, what an evocative term. What it meant is the idea that the wafers and the wine is the body and the blood of Christ. They're actually, in the Catholic faith, they're actually then a living thing. And so if someone were to destroy the wafers or pour out the wine, then they were doing a very sacrilegious thing. In fact, many Jewish people were put to the sword in the Middle Ages for supposedly doing that very thing, which I seriously doubt happened. And so I'm asking your forgiveness because the relationship between title and poem is tenuous. I just really liked the idea of Desecration of Host, and I was not going to let it go. But yeah, and who doesn't like watching a campfire? It's something that you can stare at and not even realize where the time goes, and it is as meditative a thing as you can do. So the second half of the poem has to do with houses burning, a house burning, but not just any house, somebody who's pretty wealthy. The connection is not even clear to me, so it was random and totally Bill's fault. Oh,
I was just wondering if you've ever written a poem about a fire in a gas fireplace.
we have a gas fireplace, and that is never gonna make a poem. Yes. Premise: careens from partisan sky. What telling acceleration? Where are the heavens crashing through the branches? I don't see it. You're presuming the claims you're making. There are other explanations. Here's the point. My duties this instant, fixed mid-hurdle from birth to ending. The unborn exceeded. Don't get self-righteous. We all presume a bleaker future. When the sky collapses, we can watch it together. Too few for quorum and far too gone to give notice. How many of you guys saw maybe 5 years ago some really stupid senator come in, and it was January or February, with a snowball and says, "Does this look like global warming?" No, it looks like a snowball. This is my projection of the kinds of arguments, I guess, that are going to be delivered. But, you know, it seems like for people who are very conservative, their concern is this moment. The future, it takes care of itself. But we know it doesn't.
Like the heavens crashing through and the sky collapses, is that like the old thing of where, isn't it Chicken Little running across the road saying the sky is falling, like everything's bad, like everything's...
Yes, I mean, there's belittling going on, and Chicken Little is something to belittle. I should write that down. Yes, thank you. You're right. Sightline. Life's easy. Clock in, do this, do that, then on to home for second shift. There's no call for might and main. Drink, toke up, let others climb razor's edge, bend life their way or not. To live in their attempts, that, but for the telling, we can mount their ridges past our vanishing point, where, fluffing pillow, I plunge again into ever stranger dreams. I had a National Geographic subscription for a long time, and they don't so much anymore, but they used to put in some things that are adventures. Strictly, they used to really light me up. And there was one about these guys who were climbing what was called the Razor's Edge. And at some point I realized that I was living vicariously through them. And they are probably not, they're probably not drinkers. They probably don't, they have their distraction.
Thank you very much, Ray. Following up on what Amanda and several people mentioned, I do like the format of your reading without the words on the screen, but there's too much there for me to absorb very much of it from the reading. No criticism intended of your reading, but there's a lot there. Your economy of words is amazing, and I have to read that 2 or 3 times to begin to unpeel it, the layers a bit. But it's very, very moving, very good.
And well, thank you for that. I feel like even if you don't understand a single word of it, there's still a musicality to be enjoyed. So hopefully that's a saving grace.
For me, I love poetry, and I read a lot of poetry, and that is for me what you just said, how I respond to poetry. I respond to it on pretty much an emotional level initially, and then I read the same poem over and over and start trying to figure out what it's actually saying. But when I first read it, I'm not really that, it gives me the words, just the cadence of the words and the feeling that I get from it is what's important. There's some poetry that I don't read because it just feels like crap to me.
Sure.
But this, yeah, I really enjoy reading your poetry. I enjoyed hearing you say it, but I don't normally try to find the meaning in it right away. That's not how I respond to it. That comes later after I repeat it over and over and over and start,
I remember as a teacher, I said, okay, everybody, let's think about this. And I looked down and there's a boy there who's rubbing his head. I said, what's the matter? He says, I'm getting a headache. So don't, enjoyment hopefully falls short of getting a headache.
So how do you define poetry? That's one question. I have another one to follow up.
Wow. I didn't think it was going to be so difficult here. Wow. Yeah, yes, what Ron said. My mind is rather chaotic, and so I pull things from it that may or may not connect, and find a way that it could be musical. And I am not even coming close to answering your question. I'm sorry.
Well, don't worry, he's got another one.
Yeah, what do you think of James Dickey's poetry?
Oh, I love it. In particular, its nature themes, and the idea that man is a powerful animal. That's what I get from it, and I really enjoy it. And he's from Georgia.
That is, I knew James Dickey. I worked in Columbia, South Carolina, and he was the poet in residence at the University of South Carolina. And one year he won this top award for writing poetry. And so I started reading some of it and realized how hard it is for me to read poetry.
It's not for everybody.
I'd like to thank you for your Sightline poem. I have a unique, I guess, take on that in that as a Norwegian living in the United States, I have observed that through television, and particularly in the national sport of football, you are an observation nation, and the Winter Olympics is coming on very shortly, and I grew up in a participation nation. So this particular poem, brought me to observe or participate, and that's just simply my take on it.
And thank you for that.
Well, we have time for just one more, Connie.
I just wondered, all the poets you've studied and taught, do they live in your head like mine do? So I don't see a snake, I see a narrow fellow in the grass, or walking through the woods, it's these woods, whose woods these are, I think I know, and then, dust of snow from a hemlock tree, everything. A graveyard is, gather ye rosebuds while you may. And so they all live in my head, and they follow me. They sort of enhance my experience wherever I am.
Yes, but to answer your question, I wouldn't say that precisely, maybe indirectly. It's my mind is chaotic. There's, as Pat can attest, and so I also love music. So when I pull all these chaotic ideas together, I see if there's some way that I can make it a cohesive music-sounding unit, and that's all I can. That's all I got right now. Thank you.